Mr. Watts, he's armed himself shots. Shots, watch it, tear gas. Live rounds. Also, I can see that.
Justice for Quindon! The man is a boxer, man. Why can't you put in a boxer, man, to do that?
But I just since my cousin there, no, you come on the East Coast.
You listen to me.
Right? No, you come on the East Coast.
You listen to me now.
You gotta listen to me too, man.
I am listening to you.
Right? Now, I see you on the East Coast. The day when they get a protest of them, the next day, that's when you see one bigger heads come up for talk to my family. Right? And that's bad. If we didn't do a protest, we want to see nobody for justice. You see? I'm not holding back nothing. I'm not holding back nothing. I just need justice for my family.
Mr. Watts, he's armed himself shots. Shots, watch it, tear gas. Live rounds. Also, I can see that.
Justice for Quindon! The man is a boxer, man. Why can't you put in a boxer, man, to do that?
But I just since my cousin there, no, you come on the East Coast.
You listen to me.
Right? No, you come on the East Coast.
You listen to me now.
You gotta listen to me too, man.
I am listening to you.
Right? Now, I see you on the East Coast. The day when they get a protest of them, the next day, that's when you see one bigger heads come up for talk to my family. Right? And that's bad. If we didn't do a protest, we want to see nobody for justice. You see? I'm not holding back nothing. I'm not holding back nothing. I just need justice for my family.
I get visitors all of a sudden. All of a sudden, visitors. And good evening. Welcome to Politics 101 on a Thursday evening. Vincent Alexander is here, and we are going to be talking about a number of issues. Wherever you are, please share the link. Share the link and let everyone know we're here. Took you back in time there, as we've been doing this week, because we want to shatter this story, this myth, that some people have been carrying on with, especially some black men. During the coalition time, they said that the coalition knock off 7,000 mainly East Indian sugar workers, and they closed down 4 estates, affecting more the East Indian community. And as a result of that, the East Indians went back to the PPP. They turned their backs on the coalition government. That sounds rational to me. If you feel that you are discriminated against, you're not going to be voting for those who discriminate against you. That seems rational to me. That seems that Indian people are rational. They're human beings. They have souls. They have feelings. But some people, including some black men, are telling us that, since 2020, black people have been killed. Quindon Bacchus, or in Boston, Peter Headley. Black women have been spat upon. Police kneeling down on their chest. Black homes have been mowed down. Mocha, Hillfoot, Linden. The business places have been torn down in front of the hospital, in front of Demico. Their sons have been killed and used as part of sacrifice, the Henry boys. The mainly African teachers have been denied their wages and salaries. They've been kicked around. And after all of that, we are told that these African Guyanese will vote for the PPP and give them 10 extra seats to get a 2/3 majority. What it means is that unlike our Indian Guyanese brothers and sisters, rationality is not attributed to African Guyanese. Beat them, spit on them, lick down the house, and they will vote for you. That seems like irrationality to me. You see, people expose themselves and they think that we are jackasses. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. As the mighty Sparrow said, if I was bright when I was going to school, I would be a damn fool. Because the kind of political education these people are giving to us reminds us of Dan is the man in the van. Good evening, please share the link. Please share the live because we're on.
Education that they try to give me is a good thing I was done. I couldn't absorb it. To me, I used to laugh everything they go ahead, fellas. Dan is a man in a van. And if you see Dan, that way you're trying to teach me. Well, according to the education you get in a school, you will grow up through ambition for one. But if mine is in school, he will be like a fool.
We seem to have a bad recording there. They don't want us to hear Dan is the man in the van. They don't want us to hear about Dan is the man in the van. The bad education that we used to get, that is the kind of crazy education that they're trying to give us now.
You see, there was a system, the British system, and they had a man aiding and abetting them, a fellow by the name of J.O. Cutteridge. So write all kind of fool thing and put in the book. So when we now learn that as children, we grow up to be marginally literate, just good enough to serve. So I objected to that. The teacher put me in the back bench and said, "You're a troublemaker, you little Francisco. You're the troublemaker. Get to the back bench." So I accustomed with that. They put me in the back bench. But you know, there were other guys like myself. He said, "I'm a musician." They put all of us in the back bench. So instead of learning all that the teacher was teaching, Dan is the man in the van. Let me get him a verse of that. Well, according to the education you get when you're small, you will grow up with true ambition and respect for one and all. But in my days in school, they teach me like a fool. They think they teach me I should be a block-headed mule. But they teach me. They tell me Pussy has finished his work long ago, and now we resting and think. Then they say, Solomon Gandhi, one of the money, the ass in the lion skin. Then they say, winking, blinking, and nod. Say, off in the wooden sloop. How the goatee lose his tail, and the alligator fighting to get monkey liver soup. And Dan is the man in the van. The poems and lessons they write and send from England impressed me. They were trying to cultivate comedians. Comic books made more sense. You know it is fictitious without pretense. Joe Cartridge wanted to keep us in ignorance. He said, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty didn't fall. Pussy, pussy, yonder, where shall I wander? Ding dong bell, mama yo, pussy in the well. R-I-K-K-I-T, V-R-I-K-K-I-T, and Dan is the man, the man. Captain, there's a treasure on board. Examine the horn. Cartridge was plenty times more advanced than them scientists. I can't believe that one man could write so much damn foolishness. Aeroplanes and rockets didn't come too soon. Scientists used to send things up in balloon. This time, Cartridge done make a cow jump over the moon. And he said, Tom, Tom, the piper's son stole a pig and away he ran. Once there was a woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. Hickory, dickory, dock. The mouse run up the clock. The lion and the mouse, a woman pushing a cow to eat grass on top of her house. And Dan is the man in the van. How I happen to get a little education, my friends. Me I know. All they teach me is about Brer Rabbit and Rumpelstiltskin. Oh, they wanted to keep me down indeed. They tried their best but couldn't succeed. You see, the head was done, see, and up to now I can't read. Who the hell care about Peter? Peter was a pumpkin eater, and the lily pad people like Gulliver. When I was sick and lay abed, I had a pillow at my head, and the goose laid the golden egg. Spider catching fly, Morocco with wings flapping in the sky. They beat me like a dog to learn that in school. If my head was bright, I would be a damn fool. But Dan is the man in the van. Dan is the man in the van. Can a pig dance a jig for a fig? Can a pig dance a jig for a fig? The little boy stood in his shoes and he wondered. He stood in his shoes and he wondered. Mr. Mike goes to school on a bike. Mr. Mike goes to school on a bike. Twirly and twisty were two screws. Twirly and twisty. Dan is the man in the van. Dan is the man in the van.
Oh yes, the mighty sparrow, Sling of Francisco. Sling of Francisco. One of the classics. Dan is the man in the van, the stupidness that they used to teach us back then, and the stupidness this government want to tell us. Beat you up, lick you down, deny you, oppress you, take away money from it, Father G. And then you go vote for them. Dan is the man in the van. Good evening, wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining us from up there in Linden. It's one of the places that they're telling us half of the people, 3/4 Linden, gonna vote for them. Yay. God bless Clive Thomas. He said, well, if you give in $100,000, $100,000 freck, if you're giving it to everybody over 18, you're really giving it to voters. You're targeting it to voters. And I understand the mouth open today's story jump out. Jack Dio said, if you live overseas and you're a Guyanese, you're entitled to the money. But the distribution will be done in Guyana. If you're a Guyanese and you live overseas, once you can show an ID card and a passport, you come home and you get the thing. You're a voter. And we know that they may have gotten stolen one seat in 2020 from Guyanese who live overseas, who didn't come home to vote, but people vote for them. See, when Professor Thomas said, this thing that they're giving people is really giving it to voters, not to families. There is a link with this $100,000 and the election that come in. I smell something. I smell something. I smell something. Good evening. We're going to be talking to Vincent Alexander about the election coming up. You know, he's a GCOM there. And then UG. Burnham idea. This man went to the parliament, the National Assembly, gave a speech about what the PPP going to do, and he headlined it with a PNC idea and a WP idea. You have heard thing? Burnham is the most hated man as far as the PPP is concerned. Yet the PPP went and launched the campaign in National Assembly using Burnham idea. Jack Dio cussed Clive Thomas, said Clive Thomas is a failure. Imagine that. Clive Thomas is a failure. He never run anything, but he run Gaisuko, and he did a terrible job. He run Sarah, and he did a terrible job. But he never run nothing. He's a failure. Instead of dealing with what Clive Thomas put on the table, he cussed Clive Thomas. That's the PPP politics. It's the politics of hatred. And then when you cuss Burnham, you cuss Clive Thomas, you cuss this black man, you cuss the black man, you tell the world black people will love you more and vote for you. That is the Guyana that they're trying to develop for us. All is linked for the election. You see, if enough of them go around the place and said the PPP will win by 8 seats and 2/3 majority. When they eventually rigged the election, they're going to say even some black people were running polls, and they came up with that. That would be the greatest defiance of logic. But that is the PPP that they're preparing for us. If the census that they're hiding from me, I understand is showing that Indo-Guyanese is now about 40%. They got to get 10 more percent. They got to get another 5 seats, 6 seats. And they got turned to the people they're beating up. Logic defies that. So they're going to thief those seats if we allow them. Wherever you're joining us from, good evening. We're ready to roll because we're going to talk about UG. UG free. That's how Burnham had it till they come in 1993 and they take it away. They put them back now and they say it's their idea. But you see, universities depend on tuition for money to run the university. And if you take away tuition, you have to give the university the money to make up for that tuition that they are not getting. We know that in the budget, they get no money there. And so far as we are concerned, so far as we are hearing, they have not given UG the money to make up. We're going to talk about that. These people are no good, and it's not like they're doing bad. It's that they don't know what they're doing when it comes to certain policies. But never mind, because that's not bothering them. All they are concerned about is lick down the country and prepare to thief the elections next year. I think we're ready. Let's bring in Vincent. Vincent, good evening. Vincent? Good evening. We're not hearing you.
Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, I'm hearing you now.
I'm fine. You're hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing
I got
you.
the impression from the earlier part of the program that we may be having some technical problems. But let's see how it goes.
Yes, let's see how it goes. All right. You had some Don is the man in the van in school?
I had more than that as a man in the van. For example, I attended a private school. In that time, we didn't have free educations yet. And I didn't do West Indian history. I did English history. That was the history that they taught us, not West Indian history. So it was more than Dan is the man in the van. The English were the men in us.
Wow. And then, of course, we got independence. PNC came to power. Burnham was the leader. And one of the things that he set out to do was to get rid of Dan is the man in the van. I remember entering high school in 1970. And I didn't do anything with Shakespeare till I got into third form. And we did one Shakespeare thing, Taming of the Shrew. And I did that in third form. when I got into high school in 1970, I was reading Samuel Vaughan and Edgar Metterholzer and Martin Carter and George Lamin and these people. Hardly Dan is the man in the van. And so Burnham felt that education, a new education, a different kind of education, was part of the decolonization process. And so, therefore, education was much more than reading and writing. In Jamaica, Michael Manley also introduced universal education, and it was done throughout the Caribbean. Education had to be accessible to poor people to get rid of the Dan is the man education, but also to empower people. Vincent, when you heard Irfan Ali go to the National Assembly and headline the launch of the PPP campaign with Burnham's idea, what went through your mind?
Much of what is happening is merely political.
Mm-hmm.
Focuses on how do we establish dominance and control over the society. And much is being done, and much will be done to establish that dominance and control. But as one looks at what is being done, one could clearly see that there is no depth and or no good intent. I don't know if you have had a little problem just now again.
Yeah, we are hearing you.
In relation to the University of Guyana,
Mm-hmm.
there has been serious attempts over the years to establish control and dominance successful. And as a consequence of that, the university has not been the beneficiary. There's always been a problem with insufficient funds at the university, even as the government of that day, the PPP government, complained about quality and complained about composition, to a large extent, the composition of the academic staff. What I found ludicrous was in 1992, PPP came into government and they raided the University for Human Resources. In the Faculty of Agriculture, which was the faculty with the most PhDs, at least 4 or 5 of those PhDs were removed from the university to serve in various ministries. We saw the same thing happening in the Faculty of Arts. For example, the Minister of Education came from the Faculty of Arts. But even as they raided the university for human resources, they complained that there was a dominance of people of African descent in the university, and therefore the university was stacked against the government by virtue of that dominance. So it's 2 issues there. On one hand, they contributed to the landscape in terms of the ethnic composition of the academic community, and or one may say the political composition, because the Jeffreys even were. But on the other hand, having raided the university, they turned around to say that the
We seem to be having some.
university was dominated.
We seem to be having some difficulty at Vincent end. Vincent, we seem to be having some difficulty at your end there.
By people of African descent in the academic arena of work at the university.
We seem to be having some difficulty at Vincent end. Let's see if we get him back. Vincent, are you hearing us? Are you hearing us, Vincent? We seem to be having some difficulty there. Bandwidth, it seems. Let's see if Vincent comes back in. The university, as Vincent was saying, has always been a place that the PPP sees as a problem for them because they have not been able to control it. And they've always said that UG was dominated by African Guyanese. And we know what they've set about to do in the institutions that have been populated by African Guyanese, whether it's the public service, whether it's the University of Guyana, the army, the police. They've tried their level best to control those organizations, to control those institutions. Vincent, are you hearing us?
Yes, I am back. As I said to you, David, from the inception,
Yeah.
I for whatever reason, I saw these technical problems which seem to be continuing. But let's again see.
Yes, let's see how far we get. Yes, go ahead. Continue where you left off. You were telling us about UG.
So the university
and the raiding of the UG.
It's always been a battleground. With the PPP attempting to gain control, not only in terms of the administration, but in terms of the student politics as well. You know, there were the days when at the University of Guyana, if you had a student election, it was an election that saw the PPP, the PYO, and the PNC contested. Students were not allowed to be independent or apolitical. They were dragged into the political struggle. However, sometime in the 80s, with the people like Jonathan Adams and Harry, they moved the university student politics away from inter-party politics and sought to make it genuine student politics. I'm saying that to say that in recent times, we have seen the attempt once again for the political party, this time not parties, to attempt to gain control of student politics and the student society, so that at every level, whether it's the staff, whether it's the students, we see this attempt at control. And in the absence of that control, the university is starved of funds, it's vilified. And all indications are that that will continue. Because with the announcement of free education at the university level from January, we witnessed what Vice President Jagdeo had to say. He said in uncertain terms that, yes, you're going to get as much as you've gotten in the past. And that in itself is a problem because the university has always been starved and what we've gotten in the past has never been sufficient. So that's the first problem. And he's made it clear that that's what the university is likely to get. And secondly, he has said that the university has to earn its keep in the terms of what it produces, the quality of the education. So he's making statements about that and suggesting that if the university does not come up to his expectations, then there are going to be other problems. And he specifically said that they are going to fund students to study overseas and things like that. So clearly we see that there is no good intention, which we also saw with the introduction of gold, because what has happened with the introduction of gold is billions of dollars are being spent to have students do online courses, when in fact the university is being starved of resources to develop and to be able to offer courses with the kind of support that is required for them to do the best of jobs. So we have a serious problem on hand. And this problem is further manifest in the manner in which this question of free education is being handled. We had some months ago, I think in the last budget or so, an indication that they were incrementally reintroducing free education. And what they did do in the first instance? In the first instance, they said that they're granting waivers to persons who had outstanding funds for loans. Now that has little or nothing to do with the university. Persons who had outstanding funds for loans, their fees would have been paid into the university, and they were repaying the Ministry of Finance. To give them a waiver does not impact the University of Guyana. So that the first phase of the exercise did not impact in any way students attending the university at this time, since they were given waivers to persons who had already attended the university and graduated. The fact of the matter is that a very large number of those persons paid fees, and they're not going to benefit from waivers. And another large section of those persons have migrated, and therefore they're not here to benefit from those waivers. So really, it's a sham in terms of contention that they're going to be waiving the fee payment or the repayment for those persons, because it has absolutely no impact on the university. And we see this problem continuing in the most recent announcement that they are going to be waiving fee from January. You know what that has resulted in? That the students who are presently in the university are holding back on paying fees. In fact, since the announcement that they will be introducing new education, students have been holding back from paying fees, which has led to serious internal problems in the university. Because with students not paying fees, then the university has serious problems with their cash flow. Serious problems with their cash flow. And the university, in the kindness of its heart, has continued to give tuition to those students who would not have paid fees, with the hope that at some point in time, they would pay those fees, and the university, in fact, had put mechanisms in place to say to them that you will not graduate if you don't pay the fees. But the fact of the matter is, them not paying meant that there was a tremendous cash flow. And it added up to hundreds of millions of dollars. Not being paid further woes for the university because even those students who were paid.
Yeah, we're having problems at Vincent end, bandwidth, Wi-Fi
No,
problems. He's back, yes.
The students are now withholding those fees, and the university is therefore faced with a serious problem of cash flow. And one doesn't know when January comes. January is in the middle of the academic year. Students pay fees for an academic year, and they have not been paying to a large extent for the first semester. And so one is not quite sure what provisions will be made to recoup the unpaid fees for the first semester. And in fact, the unpaid fees from 2020, when the announcement was made that they will be reintroducing fees. So the university really is in a chaotic situation right now in terms of its funding. And even in the face of that, you're getting threats from Jagdeo about what will happen to the university if they do not meet his demands. David, this has been my worst experience at
Yes, it's yeah, we're having some difficulty. I don't know if you want to log out and log back in and see if it gets better.
Online show. My very worst.
Yeah, maybe you want to log out and log back in and see if it will get better.
Frequency with which I'm speaking to you now. I'm not sure whether I'm speaking today. I'm gone again. I don't know what we'll do. This seems to be something that will continue.
Yeah. I would say log out and log back in and see if it gets better.
All right, I'll do that. You know, early on I was completely knocked off and came back in. But let's see. I'll go.
Yeah, Brother Vincent Alexander, they're having some difficulty. Let's hope we can get those difficult. But he's raising some points there. The university has a cash flow problem, and the government is pampersetting itself about this free education and goal and all of that stuff. But the sum total of all of that is that the university staff of funds. Now, the university depends on tuition. We all know that. You've got to pay for security. You've got to pay for staff who are not faculty. You've got to pay for all the things that we enjoy at a university. And tuition is a big chunk of the university cash flow, the university revenue. And so in the middle of the school year, they're short of funds. And the government has not stepped in to give them those funds. The University of Guyana is a government institution. And if the government is taking away a source of income for the university, the government has to be able to step in and to replace that source that is being taken away. Of course, all of us want to go back to free education. It's a right. It's our constitutional right. But it has to be done the right way. It is the same issue with the cash transfers. They are implementing these policies, but they're not doing it in a sincere way. And because they're not doing it in a sincere way, they're sabotaging the whole process. And now the university is in problems. The government has to step in and to give the university more money. That is the whole idea of free education, is that the government is subsidizing education. If you're not going to pay tuition, it means that the government is subsidizing education at the university. And this is not the case. So once again, after all the fanfare, the truth is now coming out. After all the fanfare with the cash transfer, we are learning today the cash transfer is meant for voters, including voters who live overseas. So if all the overseas people were to go home and claim their cash transfer, it's going to be more than the 600,000 that Jagdio is talking about. And we are not saying that people should not get this thing, but understand what is going on. They're less interested in giving you money as a means of sustaining you and getting you out of poverty. And they're more in an elections gimmick. So those people overseas are going to be enticed to go home and get the $100,000. And you can imagine those people who the PPP feel that are their supporters, they're going to left the ID. They're going to left the ID. They collect the $100,000 and they left the IDs with the PPP. And we know what they did with people's IDs at the 2020 election. You all see the trick. The same thing at UG. Vincent is explaining that after all the big noise that they're restoring free education, they are in effect not doing that. They're making the students feel nice by saying you don't have to pay tuition. But in effect, what they're doing is undermining the university, because they see the university as a Black people place. Sisters and brothers, we got to keep teaching ourselves. We got to keep seeing the tricks of this government. Now, I was told by activists in some of our strongholds that as a result of the cash transfer, the cash grant, the thing that they're giving, the $100,000, a lot of young people who are not registered are now going to get registered to get the $100,000. They ain't get ID. So they got to go and get an ID. And in the going to get an ID means you're going to register. I understand that in my village, there alone, the villages around Buxton, Melanie, Bachelor's Adventure Paradise, Golden Grove, an activist was telling me that he went by at Caldigen, and there were about 300 young people there. On the day that he passed there, they're trying now to get the ID, to get the 100,000. The PPP is now finding out that they may be helping to get some of our people who are not registering to go now and get ID and to get their names on the list of registrants. And from the list of registrants, that is how they pull the voters list. This means that the voters list will now be swelled far, far beyond the last report of GCOM. GCOM, the last report, puts the voters list at 700 and something thousand. So if more people are going now to register to get this 100,000, it means that the voters list is going to swell further. Now, on the one hand, it may mean that some of our people who weren't registering will now be registering. But the voters list is going to be swelling. I think Vincent is back. Let's see here if it's better. Hello, Vincent.
Yes, I'm back. Hopefully better.
Hopefully
I'm
better.
back.
All
Hopefully
right.
better.
Just pick up. Oh, yes, just pick up from where you left off.
Yes, I think
You
I
were
was still
talking
talking
about
about the
UG.
university
Yes, that the fact that
and the fact
mhm.
it is. Let me make a comparison. The same manner in which the cash grant was announced, and it was obvious that there had been no preparatory work, no structured approach. It's the same manner in which the reintroduction of free education has been announced. With obviously no preparatory work to deal with the situation at hand. And this clearly points to the fact that these decisions are being announced within some political time frame rather than within some planning and administrative time frame, because there's obviously been no planning. And if I'm not mistaken, you have a university to which you are reintroduced. And I don't know that you have necessarily included the university in the discussions as to how you're going to transit from the payment of fees, with a significant interregnum in terms of the first semester for the academic year for which you said you will be abolishing fees payment, and leaving the university in a predicament in terms of how it handles its resources to deliver education, whilst this matter, which has not been carefully thought out, is now hopefully addressed. Probably the better word is redressed, so as to regularize the situation at the university. Nobody knows what are the consequences of abolition of fees, whether the government will pay for each student that comes to university, whether the government will simply give a blanket subvention unrelated to the number of students in the manner in which, up to now, the revenues related to the number of students because fees are paid per student. None of that has been said to the public. And I'm not sure any of it has been said to the university. And so we're not quite sure what is going to eventuate in terms of a smooth transition to the non-payment of fees and the continued operation of the university based on the revenues that should be at its disposal.
Vincent, you were a registrar.
Interestingly,
Yes, go ahead.
one should note that in terms of the university's, in terms of the government's contribution to UG from 1992 to now, what they have done is tinkered with the council. In 1994, Minister Ms. Nott went to Parliament and changed the composition of the council. of course, having changed that composition, they themselves never observed the requirements of the statute in terms of how the vacancies for council members were filled. Recently, they've again intervened simply to extend the size of the council and to introduce a number of new organizations like churches and so, who will now be in the council, without any other change, although the university had gone through a consultancy that sought to look at how it can be better organized, which consultancy spoke to the question of the council, the way in which it should be comprised, and to other things that require statutory adjustments. And they have simply ignored all of that. They've ignored the recommendations in relation to the council, but they've gone to extend the council in a manner that will give them, I don't know, extended dominance, in which the council is presently constituted. And when active, they have the dominance. But here they've extended it, and one can only say for the purpose of overwhelming the academic community in terms of the dominance on council. So one really could come to the conclusion that the enterprise that they're into is one of control and dominance. And in the absence of that, not much will happen for, as has been the case since 1992, for the university.
For the university. Sisters and brothers, you all are hearing it here tonight. After all the song and dance about restoring free education, it comes at what cost? The cost of further undermining the university. The government has been doing parallel things. The gold scholarship thing is a parallel thing. Online education, online degrees. I teach at a tertiary education, and I'm teaching in the age of online education. And I can tell you that after pushing the academic community to integrate online education in order to bring more revenues into the institutions and to accommodate students who can't make it on campus, a lot of universities are now on the tail of the departments to go back to face-to-face, because the online education has its limitations. First of all, people have to be experts who are teaching online. For someone who have had to teach online because I was forced to, I don't like online teaching, because I think the students do not get their full worth for their money. After all of that, they're now telling us to go back. And it's happening across the United States of America, to go back to face, because they're recognizing that while online education brings in money, the students are being shortchanged. So at a time when the academic world is rethinking online education and are going back to a balance, the government is telling us that gold online degrees are superior to the University of Guyana. They're undermining the university. That is what they're doing. And you do not ever introduce a major policy issue in the middle of a school academic year in January. These things, first of all, they tell you long in advance, and then they introduce it at the beginning of the academic year, not in the middle. So, Vincent, have they given UG any extra money to make up for these fees?
Absolutely. Absolutely none. In fact, Vice President Jagdu in his press conference said, well, usually gotten so in the budget and therefore, they have money. They have money. What he has not said is that a greater part of UG's revenue comes from fees, and therefore the budget cannot suffice for the operations of the university. And as far as I know, there's been nothing forthcoming in terms of trying to ensure the university has the kind of cash flow to continue to fund its operations. So they're out there in the cold for all intents and purposes.
Yes.
Unless the university tells us something otherwise.
Yeah.
They haven't.
Yeah. Yeah. Vincent, let's pivot from UG for a moment. One of the consequences, I'm reliably informed, of this handout of $100,000 is that a lot of people who are not registered, who don't have ID cards, for example, are now going to get ID cards. And my little head is spinning because I am thinking voters list, election. Now Jack Dio said today that people from overseas can go home and get this handout once they have their ID. So, you live overseas, you're Guyanese, you can go home, show your ID or your passport, get this frick. I hardly think this government want to give $100,000 frick to people overseas. And I am thinking there might be a connection to the voters list that usually talk to us, what you've been hearing, and what are the likely consequences.
First of all, let's deal with the locals.
Yes.
GCOM has experienced an avalanche of persons coming to be registered. And that avalanche came immediately after the announcement of the 100,000. So obviously there are people who had no interest in being registered. Now that they hear about 100,000, there's an avalanche of people coming to GCOM. And GCOM has had to rethink its registration strategies to provide the service because they are in some regards overwhelmed, like never before, by the number of persons, the sudden peak in the number of persons coming to be registered. I did earlier, I think on an earlier program or somewhere, predict the problem we will have in terms of if you give to every individual, the problem we will have with overseas Guyanese, because it simply meant the overseas Guyanese could turn up and Jagdio don't have to tell anybody that that's a policy. The nature of things is if you are given 100,000 to every Guyanese who produces an ID card, all the overseas Guyanese got to do is to turn up and produce the ID card. And so for him to suggest that this is a thought policy is just really to cover up the realization that there is that aspect of their decision to give 100,000 to every Guyanese over the age of 18, so that you have now some correspondence between the voters list of all Guyanese over 18, whether they're overseas or home, with the sharing out of the 100,000 to all over 18 who have ID cards. So we're going to see the Ministry of Tourism and the Immigration Department will suggest very shortly that there's been an increase in the number of tourists coming together, because these people just going to come to collect the cash. And so they are really, and so we're going to see an avalanche of tourists as well. And that's going to be another good statistic for the government, that because they're doing so well, so many home as visitors to this good dear land of theirs. So there are lots of implications in terms of the manner in which announcements have been made by the president, and the impact of these announcements and the administration of affairs. There is no correlation between the administration of affairs and the announcements. The announcements are timed for political reasons. The administration of affairs have been left behind and will lead to chaos, with the hope that these announcements will lead to an increase in the turnout at election time. That's essentially what these announcements are intended to do. They're political, trying to influence the voters in a particular direction.
Vincent, we already have a problem with a bloated voters list. I think it's over 700 and something thousand, the last announcement by GCOM, right? Vincent?
In fact, on the previous program which I was on, I made the point that if they are to use the voters list is the place where you have a record of the over 18s. There's really no other authentic record. If you to use that, you need to have biometrics.
Yes.
Because it's comparing the 100,000 authentic persons. If you don't use biometrics, then you have the possibility again of people turning up with ID cards that don't belong to them and laying a claim. So I'm giving you another scenario in terms of how ill-advised are these announcements without the necessary backup administrative arrangements to ensure that there is transparency and accountability in these processes. Unless you can identify people biometrically, and that is not facial manual recognition, but electronic digital recognition. Unless you can do that, then you are likely to have a lot of fraud in the distribution process. When you look at an ID card, sometimes people resemble and all of that. Some of the cards are not sufficiently clear and all of that, and people will just get ID cards from overseas and they'll go back to the 200,000 and probably more.
That's right.
Really, we introduce chaos into public affairs in this country.
But Vincent, if you have these added registrants, people are now registering. They had no intent to register before. They're now registering. That's going to carry up the list of registrants, right?
Certainly, we are now already at 718,000 registered on the voters list. On the voters list, yes, 700 and something.
Yes, that's what you reported here the last time.
The Lord knows where we're going to end up. In the absence of the census, plus a real idea of in 2022, how many persons were determined to be the actual active population of this country. One needs a census. In the absence of that, one cannot give guarantees about what is happening in terms of the numbers of people being registered.
Yeah, I of course monitor around where I live there, and a PNC activist, my friend, was feverishly calling me a couple of days ago. I didn't get back to him, and last night he eventually got on to me and he said, on a given day at College Inn, you have about 300-400 people going there to to register. And I'm saying if that's one place, you can imagine if that is happening around the country. We're going to have a voters list that is going to be over 1 million shortly. And what does that mean? What does that mean for the electoral roll?
It is clear that we need to go to ground zero in terms of our electoral roll, so that we can compile an electoral roll that really reflects the voting population. And for that, we have to go to ground zero in our registration.
Yes.
So we can really reflect the real population between from age 14 and above. Unless we admit that there is the need for that, what we are doing is embracing a corrupted system, a corrupted role. Because we haven't mentioned here the issue of the persons who have died. And in the past, I have emphasized the question of the overseas dead. But even as I emphasize that, I'm become concerned of the local dead, because we have had recently many people in social media and other places indicating that there's the death of the parents 10 years ago and so forth. And even with the GRO's record that we are in possession of, those deaths are not being recognized, and therefore those names are not being taken off of the roll. I must confess that GCOM has tabled a discussion on this matter that will seek to go beyond the GRO in terms of identifying the dead. So we have to see how that goes. We now want to look at issues of the deaths reported at police stations. And all persons who die at home, they should be given clearance by the police, so the police have a record of all the persons who die at home. Hospitals, far-flung areas, medical centers, and things like that. So we're looking at more mechanisms to identify the local dead, because obviously, notwithstanding what we've been doing in the past, the evidence suggests that we haven't cleared that list of the local dead. And then the problem of the overseas dead is another big problem. We know that we have a population overseas, probably exceeds the local population. And that, to a very large extent, is responsible for the size of the list. If we were to go back to ground zero, all the persons who died from 2008 might not be on the list. And all the persons who died not only in Guyana but overseas, and that obviously will be in the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
It's a three-figure matter in terms of thousands.
Yes. And you somebody was suggesting to me the other day, well, you can go to funeral parlors and see how many people come home to bury. But it's a tiny fraction of people these days that are bringing their family home to bury. They bury overseas.
Very
yeah. And now cremation is quite popular. So, your family die overseas, you cremate them, you bring home the ash and you hold a memorial service. So you can't even go to the funeral parlors.
But the fact of the matter is, when somebody comes home to be buried, I'm not sure that, unless we check with the funeral parlors, that we have a mechanism for recording those deaths for the purpose of deletion of the names from the register. So it doesn't matter how many people come home to be buried. And as you said, the number is not exceedingly high. What's interesting? I raised this question in GCOM of how do we capture the dead overseas? And a GCOM commissioner representing the ruling party said to me, "Are you assuming all the people overseas are dead?" I said, "No, I'm not assuming that, but I'm assuming that there's a number among those overseas who have died." And he then said to me, "Well, produce the evidence."
Wow.
He sees, you imagine a guy and he's telling you that to explore the mechanism for taking overseas dead off the list, you have to produce the evidence of overseas dead. And I told him he probably doesn't even watch that announcement. It's so obvious, it's so natural that people will die, whether they're here or overseas. That should never be a question.
That's right.
But here was a potential obstacle to addressing the problem by saying, well, why are you addressing a problem where you don't have empirical evidence of people who die overseas? And that
Anything
can
and
only
everything.
suggest that there's an interest in not dealing with the problem. That's all it can suggest. It's an interest in not dealing with the problem. And we can see where that interest lies because we have the evidence of how that situation has been manipulated in the 2020 election. And let me
Yes.
say this, David. Every day people are shouting about something that Mingo did and about attempts to rig the elections. Let's assume it is true
Yes.
what Mingo did. Let's assume it is true. Isn't it also true that the recount showed that there were other activities, not unlike those attributed to Mingo in the 2020 elections? And how could we simply point a finger at the Mingo and completely ignore evidence that nobody has pushed back on, that there were people who were voted for who were not in the country? You have everybody news and everybody repeating all this thing with Mingo, 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 Mingo. Yes, let's say Mingo did that. Why are they not paying attention to the evidence that's in the public domain about the people who were voted for, who were not in the country? Why hasn't Nandalal taken all the information he collected from GCOM and tell us what is the outcome of the verification, immigration records of those names that allegedly, because those haven't been verified as yet, but they're those which have been verified. And if you take what has been verified as a sample, 75% of the names that turned up as people being voted for were verified to be true.
Were verified. And just a couple
So
of
we have
days
a
on this.
nation that's not itself.
Yeah. No, Vincent, you're quite right. I'm glad you went there. A couple of days ago on this program, I said, if you were saying Mingo and others attempted to rig the election, and then you go do a recount and show that others didn't attempt, they actually did things that amount to rigging. So you are telling us that attempted murder is a higher crime than murder itself. The logic, it can only mean that you have an investment in rigging election. They have an
Definitely.
investment in rigging. That they are
There was
silencing.
somebody saying in the recent papers, the PNC can't live down with 2020.
Yes.
PPP is living up to 2020, but the PNC can't live down to 2020.
Yeah. And you hear that from people like Dominique Gaskin and others. I mean, talking about this attempt.
So that really we are in a situation where
Yes, go ahead, Vincent. Go ahead, Vincent. We're not hearing you.
no, and one of the things, and this is why this case in court is so important. What have they charged Lowenfield for? What have they charged him for? If I'm not mistaken, they're charging Lowenfield for producing a report unrelated to Mingo, you know.
Yes.
It says,
Yes.
look, from the information available, we cannot admit into our account the East Coast votes. That's what they're charging him for. Now, I didn't agree with Lowenfield suggesting that that's what we should do, but he raised an issue that ought to have been addressed. I suggested that there should have been a nullification of those votes, and a
And have a
by-election
by-election.
to ensure that people are properly enfranchised, rather than us counting and declaring an election based on votes known not to be verified. But he is charged for raising that issue. And again, even if he had malintent, he was unsuccessful. So he's still at the level of an attempt in the face of evidence which shows that there were people who went beyond any attempt. And we don't have a history of charging people for an attempt, or else Boodoo would have been in jail.
Thank you.
If we charge people for an attempt, Boodoo would have been in jail in 2011.
And I don't think the statute of limitations.
Because there was.
I don't think the statutes of limitations are gone yet for Boodoo to be charged.
No, they're not gone. You have to get a new government to address that question.
Yes, yes.
That was another reason why we must get a new government.
Yes, 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 yes. And I think we have to continue to push that, because I have known silencing in Guyana, but I have never seen a silencing like that. And there seemed to be just a coordination. It's not just the PPP. In fact, the PPP is doing less of it. It's people outside of the PPP in so-called civil society, who are pushing these things. You hardly, every now and again, you would hear a PPP person talk about what Boodoo do. But the PPP don't talk about it so much. It's a lot of people who are friends with the PPP, but are outside of the.
Well, the PPP, they have concluded their work. They have ingrained it. And so they now sit back and allow those people in whom they ingrained it to continue to push it as if it's the wider population that has recognized and articulating this problem. Yeah. But really, it's a projection from the PPP.
Yeah, that's right. I have a PPP bigwig, a former PPP bigwig, who's my friend, and I asked him the other day, sir. I asked him why you don't push this Mingo thing, and he laughed. He said, "We have moved on. We have moved on from Mingo. The other people push it up." So you're quite right. They have planted it in people, and they are pushing it, and you hear
in Jagdio's parlance, the Mingo thing would come under what Jagdio calls just the politics.
Mm-hmm.
In Jagdio's parlance, that would be just the politics, because that's the way in which Jagdio has treated immorality and illegalities. It's just the politics, but it's also just the politics for them to vilify, in their interests, people who do things that they would normally call just the politics.
Yes, yes.
And for example, when Boodoo did what he did, their position was, well, it was corrected. So what Mingo did was corrected. What Lowenfield did was corrected. But they're before the courts. What Boodoo did, they say, was corrected. And Boodoo continued to be a GCOM for an extended period until his contract came to an end. And even then, he was offered employment by the government as an act of confidence in him as a good public official.
Good public official. Vincent, before you go, what's happening over at Itpadaji?
Well, Itpadaji, the decade is winding down. For all intents and purposes, there will be another decade. The UN seemed to be moving clearly in the direction of another decade. So what the GMAC is doing, we are reviewing and refocusing for the new decade, bearing in mind that it's 2 years now, approximately 2 years now, and the judgment has not been handed down in a case that was concluded. We have seen other cases and have come to conclusion in a very, very short period. But the Padaji case, for which all of the matters were ventilated in court, and the judge has withdrawn to give a judgment. No judgment, even as the decade comes to an end. So the Padaji has not been the beneficiary of the largesse of the people of African descent, meaning that we haven't benefited from their taxes to do work for them. But we have continued to work with the main resources at our disposal. We have been careful not to expose local and even overseas persons who have made contributions to Padaji, because we know how vindictive the government has been.
Yes, yes.
And we don't want to expose people for them to be going after those people. But there are people who are making meaningful contributions. And on that basis, we are continuing to work in our community. Some of the work which will not be on herald, because heralding it may also have it cause it to be targeted.
Vincent Alexander here tonight, weighing in on what's happening at UG after the announcement of the reinstatement of tuition-free University of Guyana. There are consequences, backlash, if you will, as a result of that announcement, which doesn't bode well for the University of Guyana, at least in the short run, the short term. We talked a little bit about what's happening at GCOM, what's happening with the voters list, how this $100,000 handout is creating problems for the bureaucracy, GCOM bureaucracy, and what may be some of the consequences. And of course, Vincent bringing us up to date with what's happening at Padaji. Vincent, any closing thoughts?
Well, we really have on the horizon a number of issues that are indications of the nature of government and governance that we are subjected to as a people. And we have a situation where there was a Thursday press conference that any intelligent person would not fathom when one hears what is spewed on Thursdays in response to all that is happening, which clearly shows that we have a government that's a misfit. We have a government that's oligarchy, and we have a government that has absolutely, in the way it conducts public affairs, no respect for ordinary people, and has maintained a system which the United Nations says ought to be reviewed because of the institutional issues in the system that affects the people of African descent. We have a maintenance of that system, and we have attempts to take African people of African descent. And you know, I heard the Vice President talking about the Bamia contract. But we must be glad that we get a school at Bamia. And rather than being glad, we are criticizing the guys who will present the school without an increase of the amount of money to be expended on that school. And the Vice President seemed not to understand, not to accept that what is. And what citizens have to be concerned about is what affects them. What affects them. and the delivery of that school 2 years after it was supposed to be delivered affects them. You can't turn around in the face of that, praising the fact that you will get the school. And the fact that so many things we are told we are getting, but when one looks at how we get them, in terms of the quality of what we get, look at the corruption related to getting them, then the equation heavily falls on the side of the Guyanese people being shortchanged as opposed to what we get. The Guyanese people are being shortchanged, and the oligarchy are the beneficiaries of that shortchanging in the context of corruption and malgovernance.
Corruption and bad governance. Vincent Alexander here tonight. Vincent, thank you very much for coming through. It's been a little bit choppy, but we managed to get through and get as much as we could get in tonight. Thank you very much again. And to you, the audience, thank you all for staying with us another evening, another day, another moment in this long walk back to normalcy, back to our freedom, the freedom of all Guyanese. We've got to get this government out. You've got to do your work, your homework. I said last night, I said each of us will become an activist. Get people, let them go and register. Even if this $100,000 FREC is the motivation for them to go and register, let them go and register. Each vote, every vote is going to be important. And we've got to push back against backwardness. Because like I said, the PPP is turning, they intend to turn Black people and Amerindian people into hustlers. And they want to turn the Indian Guyanese community into an unfeeling community. Yet can sit back and watch a government in their name beat up on their fellow citizens, and they say nothing. We are no longer, if the PPP would have its way, African Guyanese, Amerindian Guyanese will no longer be better to Indian people. They will be hungry belly dogs. That is the Guyana that the PPP is trying to develop. A bunch of hustlers among African Guyanese, among Indian Guyanese. They turn us into a people who are fearful. And so we go along with our beating up. They turn some of us into self-haters. You hear some Black men saying, Nigel Hughes got a problem. What is Nigel Hughes' problem? He has been too Afrocentric. So Afrocentric is a problem in Guyana. That is the Guyana they are trying to develop. We say no. We say no. And we come again and again to make our no real. And you all got to help us to make that no real. I am clear. People in the African Guyanese community, they have every right to vote for whichever party they want to vote for. If African Guyanese want to join the PPP out of a matter of principle, out of a matter of what they think is the ideology of the PPP that they can identify with, I have no problems. Indian people should be able to vote and to join whichever party they want to, whether it's PNC or whoever, PPP, whoever. So I am not against people exercising the right of association with any party that they feel that they should associate with. What I have a problem with is people using the power of the state and the purse of the state to bully people into supporting them. to hurt people like slaves to support them, I have a problem with that. And if you're going to do that to African Guyanese, I'd be in your face. And so for me, in this coming election, not one damn vote for the PPP. And if people in the Black community allow themselves to be bullied, we must make their lives uncomfortable. If people in the Black community allow themselves to be bought like slaves, we must make their lives uncomfortable. You see what they're doing to Brutus? What they do to you last night is what they've been doing to Guyanese people. And Brutus was there either silent or maybe carrying out their wishes. I hear people say, Brutus got thing from them. We get thing from them later. I don't have any problem later. But I still don't want him back. He can talk, we know. But when he finished talking, we know. We must not take him back. Because you can't betray your own people. And then when they start to put fire in your backside, then you're going to say, this is what they do. And as they're saying, you can talk what they do, they will talk what you do. And so I am clear. I hear some of my brothers are saying, well, we must fight for due process for for Brutus. Let Brutus fight for due process for himself. He getting not 1 ounce of sympathy from me, not 1 ounce. If it's human rights is being trampled upon, let him fight for it. No sympathy from you all. That is my position. I'm very clear about that. And you know what? It's not about Brutus. It's about deterring other Africans from becoming Negroes. It's about deterring other Africans who are standing up, lining up to become Negroes, for them going there. I want to hang him high. And I want others of his ilk. Let it hang them high. No sympathy from me. I ain't crying. I ain't going to the wake. I ain't going to the funeral. I ain't nothing. Because they have sold their self for a few pieces of silver. No sympathy from me. I would glad if Brutus talk. Later, out we know. I don't have any problem with that. But when you don't talk, you still ain't coming back in our community. We got to get tough. Black people, we got to get tough. We got to get tough. Or else, when we wink and blink and we open back we eye, we find ourselves with shackles on our minds and on our feet. So let us shackle Brutus so that they don't shackle the rest of us. Because at some point, either by his silence or his collusion, he was party to the shackling of Takuma Ogunse. He, either by his silence or his collusion, was party to the police shooting down Boston and Bacchus and Hendy and all the hundreds of others. So don't tell me about his human rights. Let you fight for your own human rights. Because these chaps have to come to an understanding that they're representing the worst in us, the worst in the Black community. And we can't have them contaminating our people. Yes, he's a human being and he must be given due process and he must be treated like a human being and so on. But he must fight for it. I ain't fighting for that for ye. And I'm not encouraging you all to do it. If he got things for talk, talk. If you want to come on this program, talk. When he don't talk, I still not accepting he Black in the community. He's a bad influence. God bless you all. The ancestors are always, always there, here with us. I'll be back tomorrow night for another edition of Politics 101.